The small wooden table creaked as the little girl sat in silence, her tiny hands trembling around the edge of a chipped plate. The food before her looked more like punishment than nourishment, a piece of dry bread, a watery soup that had already gone cold, and the heavy silence of a house that had long forgotten tenderness. Her name was Emily, just 8 years old, yet her eyes carried shadows that belonged to someone much older. That day, she had been forced once again to sit and eat what she could no longer bear. Each spoonful felt heavier, as if every taste of that bland soup pushed her deeper into despair. Her lips quivered as she whispered almost to herself, "I can't take it anymore." The words were soft, almost drowned by the quiet of the room, but they carried the weight of every lonely night, every ignored cry, every time she was told to be quiet when her heart screamed for love. A single tear slid down her cheek and fell into the plate, mixing with the cold soup. From the corner of the kitchen, the adults barely noticed. They were too busy arguing about bills, about failures, about how the child should just eat and stop complaining. Emily's pain was invisible to them, as if she was only another burden in a life already too heavy. The table, though simple, became a stage where a child's suffering was both ignored and amplified. Her shoulders shook as she pushed the plate away, her small voice breaking the silence again, this time louder, "I can't take it anymore." The words echoed through the room like a fragile cry for help. For a moment, the arguing stopped. Someone sighed and muttered, "Drama again." Another raised their voice, "Eat it or go hungry." And just like that, her plea was dismissed, as if her tears had no meaning. Emily lowered her head, trying to hide her sobs. She wasn't simply refusing food, she was choking on the weight of neglect, of being unseen. What she longed for wasn't a better meal, it was someone to notice her pain, to see her not as a nuisance but as a child who needed care. Outside, the world went on. Cars passed, neighbors talked, laughter echoed from a house down the street. But inside that kitchen, time felt frozen in the cruel moment of a child's heartbreak. What Emily didn't know was that destiny had already begun to weave something extraordinary. On that very day, someone would hear her cry, someone no one expected. The heavy door creaked. A tall figure appeared at the threshold, his shadow stretching across the kitchen floor. He wore a dark suit, polished shoes, and a watch that gleamed even under the weak kitchen light. His presence alone shifted the air in the room. It was Alexander Warren, a man whose name often appeared in newspapers under the word millionaire. Known for his businesses, his power, his fortune, but here, he stood silent, watching a little girl cry over a plate of food she couldn't eat. His eyes narrowed, not with judgment, but with something deeper, recognition. Recognition of pain he had once felt as a child himself. For a moment, the noise of his success, the weight of his reputation, all disappeared. What remained was a man staring at a fragile soul, realizing that money and power meant nothing if they couldn't be used to answer a cry like that. The adults stumbled with excuses, surprised by his sudden arrival. But Alexander didn't listen to them. His gaze stayed fixed on Emily, on her trembling shoulders, on the whisper that had cut through the silence. He stepped closer, his voice calm yet firm, "No child should have to say those words at a table." The room fell silent. Emily looked up, her eyes swollen with tears, and for the first time that day, she felt seen. The weight of her loneliness lifted just slightly, replaced by the faint spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had finally answered her. If you're watching this and your heart felt the weight of Emily's tears, leave a like, share this story, and write in the comments what touched you most. Your support helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. The kitchen seemed to hold its breath after Alexander Warren spoke. No one expected a stranger, much less that stranger, to walk in and speak with such certainty. A clock ticked somewhere in the house, the seconds stumbling over the hush he left behind. Emily's hands were still around the plate, knuckles pale. She didn't pull it closer again, but she didn't push it farther away either. It was as if her small body had become the line between two worlds, the one where she had to swallow what hurt, and the one where someone finally said she shouldn't. A woman at the sink, sleeves rolled above bony elbows, clicked her tongue. "We don't need speeches," she said, turning the faucet back on so water hissed and sang over a pot. "Kids whine. That's what they do." A man in a faded polo crossed his arms. He looked at the millionaire with a mix of suspicion and pride, as if someone had stepped into the living room with muddy boots. "Who are you to tell us how to run our home?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. He wasn't a man who rushed. He had built his entire life on listening for the moment between impulse and decision. He took in the stuck cabinet doors, the patched linoleum, the way the light died before it could reach the corners. He saw a list of small failures that, together, spelled neglect. "Someone who heard a child say she can't take it anymore," he said at last, his voice steady, not raised. "And someone who refuses to pretend that's normal." The man's jaw flexed. The woman kept scrubbing the same pot long after it was clean. Emily stared at the surface of her soup, where the reflection of a broken bulb trembled like a star in troubled water. She didn't know who this man was beyond the sudden quiet he carried with him, but the calm in his tone felt like the first blanket on a winter night. "Emily," Alexander said, and the name in his mouth sounded like it belonged to a person instead of a problem. "What would you like to eat?" The question was too simple and too impossible at once. The man snorted. "She'll eat what we give her." Emily's lips parted, then sealed. She looked from the plate to the door to the man in the suit. A crumb clung to the corner of her mouth like a small, stubborn anchor. I don't know," she whispered. "Not this." Alexander's gaze softened. In a private corner of his mind, a picture came alive, a thin boy sitting at a different table, long ago, with a graying woman stretching stew 3 days past its life, the smell of worry heavier than the steam. He could taste the bitterness of being told to be grateful for a meal that felt like a lesson in endurance. "I remember," he thought. He slipped a card from his inside pocket and placed it on the table, but not for the adults. He set it near Emily's wrist, as if he were giving her a map no one else would think to read. "My name is Alexander. I came here because I was told this household needed help with a heater repair." His eyes flicked to the vent in the wall. The portable unit rattled like a tired insect. "On the way in, I heard your voice." "Heater's fine," the man said, though his glance betrayed the truth. "And we didn't call you." "I know," Alexander replied. "A neighbor did." Silence shifted, found a new place to settle. The woman's shoulders tightened. The man's arms dropped to his sides. At the edge of the doorway, a pair of eyes, someone's teenage daughter, watched with the kind of stillness that only grows when a house has taught you that noise is not free. "May I sit?" Alexander asked Emily. She nodded before the adults could answer. He took the chair opposite her, carefully, as if the chair were fragile, as if she were. "You don't have to eat when your stomach says no," he told her. "But you do have to be heard." The faucet squealed off. The kitchen light buzzed. A tired refrigerator thumped. "Look," the man tried again, finding his footing in the old routine of defiance, "we're not monsters. Food's food. She's not starving." Alexander looked at Emily's wrists. The thinness there was a quiet record, one that didn't shout, but spoke, all the same. He turned to the adults. "This isn't only about food." He let the sentence hang, then stood. "I'm stepping outside to make a call." He moved to the doorway, and Emily's eyes followed him with a flicker of panic, the fear that rescue is always leaving. He caught it, paused, and touched 2 fingers to the back of the chair he'd vacated. "I'll be at the door," he said softly. "I won't go far." Outside, the evening air cooled the heat that had gathered along his collar. He dialed a number he knew as certainly as his own, Marissa Hale, head of a foundation that specialized in emergency child advocacy, an organization he'd funded in the beginning and allowed to grow beyond his shadow. "Marissa," he said when she answered, "we've got a situation. 8-year-old girl. Chronic neglect cues, immediate emotional distress, food as control, probable heat issues. I need a welfare check initiated, discreetly. Send a liaison, no uniforms yet. And book a pediatric assessment for tonight." Marissa's voice didn't waste time on surprise. "Name? Emily. Surname I'll text. Address attached. On it. 20 minutes for the liaison." Pediatrician is Dr. Vale. She'll meet you at the clinic after." He thanked her and ended the call. For a heartbeat, his reflection caught in the window, a man who had everything people thought they wanted, and still remembered what it felt like to be small. He breathed in, breathed out, and walked back in. The man at the table had shifted to bluster. "You can't just barge in here, start making calls. We have rights." "You do," Alexander agreed. "And she does." He nodded toward Emily. "She has the right to be safe, to be fed with dignity, to be seen. We can handle this together. Or," he lifted the phone slightly, "someone else will handle it for you. I don't prefer escalation. But I won't look away." The woman's hand trembled against the counter. For a moment her face changed, anger cracking to reveal something like shame, then fear, then exhaustion so deep it made her look older than she was. "We're trying," she said, and the words stumbled out like someone who had forgotten how to speak gentleness. "It's just hard. Money's." Alexander lifted a hand, not to silence her, but to slow the flood of rehearsed defense. "Heart is real," he said. "Harm is also real. They are not the same thing." He crouched beside Emily's chair, eye level. "Would you like to step outside for a moment? There's a bench by the porch. We can talk where the air is kinder." Her glance flicked to the adults. Approval wasn't exactly offered, but neither was refusal enforced. She slid off the chair, each movement careful, like walking through a room of glass. He opened the door for her, held it as if doors should always open for children before anyone else, and followed her to the porch. The bench was splintered in one corner. He brushed it with his palm so she wouldn't catch her dress. She sat. He remained standing for a second, asking with his posture if she wanted distance. When she didn't flinch, he took the far end of the bench, leaving space like a small respect. "What do you like?" he asked quietly. "Not about food. About anything." Emily blinked at the question as if it were in a language she barely remembered. "Drawing," she said after a long pause. "And the way it smells when it rains." He smiled, not because the answers were charming, but because they were hers. "Do you draw the rain?" "Sometimes," she murmured. "But I run out of paper." He nodded. He wanted to promise paper, markers, a sky big enough to rain only when she asked, but he knew how promises given too soon can taste like candy replacing dinner. "We're going to the clinic later," he told her. "A doctor who listens. Then we'll find you something warm to eat that you choose." Her eyes flickered, uncertain. "Will I come back here?" The question shook something in his chest he kept hidden from shareholders and reporters. He had no right to offer guarantees. He had a responsibility to ensure systems were set in motion. "Tonight," he said carefully, "you won't be alone. After that, the people who keep children safe will make a plan with you. And I'll be near that plan." She looked at the card he'd left on the table earlier, now in her hand. He hadn't seen her take it, but of course she had. "Can I call this?" "Yes. You can always call that." Behind them, the door creaked again. The teenager from the hallway stepped onto the porch, hoodie strings twisted around her fingers. She hovered, then sat on the top step, not too close, not too far. "She didn't sleep last night," the girl said without looking at them. "2 nights before that, either." "What's your name?" Alexander asked. "Kayla." "Thank you, Kayla." The girl shrugged, eyes on a loose thread she was trying not to pick. "It's loud in there," she said. "Even when nobody's talking." He understood that sound. Some houses could shout without making a noise. Headlights slid across the curb, soft, unhurried. A compact sedan stopped at the end of the walk. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, hair neatly pinned, tote bag over her shoulder. She looked like a friend had just arrived, not a rescuer. Marissa's liaison. She lifted a hand in a hello that didn't claim anything. "Evening," she said. "Evening," Alexander replied, standing. He met her halfway down the path, their words low, efficient. When they returned to the porch, the liaison crouched to Emily's eye level just as he had. "Hi. I'm Tessa, she said. I heard it's been a hard night. Would you like to come with me and Alexander to someplace quiet for a bit? We can choose dinner together. Emily looked at Alexander. He didn't push. He didn't nod. He simply kept his gaze steady and kind, leaving the next step on her side of the bench. She slipped her small hand into Tessa's. Inside, voices rose, the predictable last moment of control trying to reassert itself. Tessa turned toward the door with a calm that had crossed 100 similar thresholds. Alexander moved beside her, a witness and a wall if needed. The man started to protest. The woman wiped at a counter that didn't need wiping. Kayla stood from the step and said, not loudly but clearly, let her go. And for once, the house listened. They walked to the car under a sky that threatened rain, the kind that carried the exact smell Emily loved. The air felt newer beyond the gate. The door opened for her, and she climbed in. Alexander waited until she was buckled, then took the front seat beside Tessa. As the car pulled away, he glanced back. Emily had turned her face to the window, eyes tracking the streetlights as if they were a secret code. He didn't speak. He knew sometimes the most important part of rescue is honoring the quiet between two rooms of a life. The clinic would be warm. The food afterward would be chosen by her. Tomorrow would be complicated, and the day after would demand patience in law and social work and stubborn grace. But tonight, a sentence had been answered. A door that should have opened finally did. And for the first time in a long time, the little girl at the table was no longer alone with a plate she couldn't bear. The clinic's lobby felt like a small island of light in a city that had already folded into night. Fluorescent panels hummed softly overhead, a fish tank glowed in the corner, its quiet drift of color pretending the world outside didn't exist. Tessa checked them in with the efficiency of someone who had learned to move quickly without looking rushed. Alexander stood beside Emily, not towering over her but angled slightly to fit her height into his field of vision, as if to say I will not lose you in a room this bright. They waited only minutes before Dr. Vale arrived, a woman with kind eyes and the practiced calm of someone who knew how to step into storms without carrying them home. She knelt to greet Emily first. Hi, I'm Laurel, she said, voice warm. I'm going to make sure you're okay tonight. We'll go slow and stop any time you want. How does that sound? Emily glanced at Alexander, then back at the doctor, and nodded. Tessa followed them down a short hall into an exam room painted with murals, clouds, a kite, a tree that forgot to stop at the ceiling. Alexander stayed in the doorway, one hand loosely in his pocket, the other holding nothing but refusing to be empty. Inside, the paper on the exam table crackled like frost under Emily's small weight. Dr. Vale took her vitals, called each number out to herself in a hush, temperature, pulse, oxygen, turning data into reassurance. She placed a pulse oximeter on Emily's finger, and the tiny red glow bathed the skin like a safe signal. You're doing great, the doctor murmured. Do you have any allergies? Laurel asked. Emily shook her head. Any tummy aches lately? Headaches? Another small shake. How is sleep? The question landed like a pebble in deep water. Emily's eyes slid to the floor. Her legs swung once, then stopped midair. Sometimes, she said, voice thin. It's loud. Loud how? Laurel's tone didn't probe, it opened a door and waited. Walls loud, Emily said after a minute. And plates. Alexander felt the word plates like a fault line. He didn't move. He let the doctor have the space. Laurel nodded. I hear you. She finished the physical exam with gentle, deliberate hands, checking for bruises that shouldn't be there, for the telltale map of neglect the body draws when no one is looking. She found none obvious. Neglect often didn't write in purple and yellow. It wrote in pallor and thinness, in deferred growth and teeth that told their own story. May I look at your mouth? Laurel asked. Emily opened wide. The doctor counted silently, then closed her own lips in a line that wasn't quite a frown. We'll get you some vitamins, she said brightly. And something warm to eat after, okay? Emily nodded without the small flinch that used to follow any sentence containing the word eat. When the exam was done, Laurel pulled a rolling stool close, its wheels whispering across the tile. "I'm going to ask a few questions you can answer however you like," she said. "If something is hard to say, you can draw it or point. Or we can sit in quiet. Quiet is an answer too." Emily's fingers found the hem of the paper gown, folded it once, unfolded, folded again. "Do you like rain?" she asked suddenly. Laurel blinked, surprised, then smiled. "I do," she said. "Especially the first 10 minutes. "Why?" Emily shrugged, a small, lopsided lift of shoulders. "It smells like new." Laurel let the sentence sit exactly where Emily put it. "That's a beautiful way to say it," she answered. "Thank you for telling me." Tessa stood near the sink, arms loose at her sides, eyes anchoring the corners of the room. Alexander stayed at the threshold until Laurel turned toward him. "Mr. Warren, would you step in for a minute?" He crossed to the edge of the exam table. Laurel's voice lowered. "Emily is medically stable," she said. "There's mild malnutrition and iron deficiency we can address right away. No acute injuries. I want a full panel in the morning, tonight. She needs food she chooses in a place where the night doesn't shout at her." Tessa nodded once. This language was their daily ground. "A temporary placement?" "For the night," Laurel said. "We'll coordinate with CPS first thing. I'll file a mandated report now, given the emotional distress and environmental concerns you described." Alexander's jaw flexed just once. He was a man used to contracts, to minutes of board meetings that pinned whole futures to lines of black text. This report mattered more than any memorandum he'd ever signed. Laurel turned to Emily again. "We're going to give you a choice," she said. "Do you want soup? A warm sandwich? Fruit? You pick. And then we'll make sure you have a quiet place to sleep where nobody tells the walls to be loud." Emily's eyes watered, not with panic but with the shock that comes when the body realizes it may stand down. "A sandwich," she said. "With cheese. And apples?" "Perfect," Laurel smiled. "We can do that." They moved to a small cafeteria open late for emergencies. The lights were softer there, the tables round. A worker behind the counter, gray hair and a bun, smile lines like parentheses, didn't ask for a name or a story. She slid a grilled cheese onto a tray, sliced apples into a paper bowl, set down a carton of milk like a benediction. Emily looked at it the way some people look at fireworks from a hillside. She took the first bite slowly, as if wanting to remember the angle of it. Cheese stretched, gold between bread, and she giggled before she could catch the sound. The nurse at the counter pretended to find something fascinating in the register screen, giving the laugh room to live. Alexander watched without intruding. He let his own stomach unclench around a hunger he hadn't noticed. Let this be ordinary, he prayed to no one in particular. Let the ordinary be a miracle tonight. While Emily ate, Tessa stepped aside to make her calls. CPS duty line, the on-call judge who would need to sign a protective order by morning, the shelter director who kept one room extra warm for exactly this hour. She spoke in a cadence that assured the world would show up where it had failed to before. When they returned to the exam room for discharge instructions, Laurel handed Emily a small brown paper bag, not heavy, just deliberate. "There's a toothbrush, toothpaste, a comb, and 2 notebooks," she said. "And colored pencils." Emily's chin lifted. "For drawing the rain?" "For drawing anything you want." They stepped back into the night, which had finally delivered on its promise, rain beginning, that exact smell Emily loved working itself into the air. The drops tapped the car roof like it was learning a new word. Tessa opened the back door and Emily climbed in, hugging the bag to her chest as if holding a map of a place she could choose to live. As Tessa drove, wipers tracing metronome arcs, the city unspooled, liquor stores and laundromats and the occasional late-night bakery making the street sweet. Alexander watched the side streets, rectangles of window light, here a silhouette stirring tea, there a cat perched like a punctuation mark. It looked like a city pretending it never looked away. Do you run into parents? He asked quietly, eyes still on the glass. Tessa considered. Sometimes they fight us, she said. Sometimes they collapse. Sometimes they are children inside adult bodies and don't know how to ask for a lighthouse. But the lighthouse isn't optional. He nodded. The teenage girl, Kayla. She tried to be a lighthouse. She did, Tessa said, and there was a small pride in it. We'll make sure someone hears her tomorrow. They pulled into a narrow lot beside a building that looked like any other night-quiet duplex, no sign, no siren. That was the point. Inside, the foyer smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and sheets dried in sun. A woman in a knit cardigan met them with a smile that didn't pretend to fix anything. I'm Nora, she said to Emily. Would you like to see your room? Emily looked up once at Alexander, then followed Nora down a short hall. The room was simple, bed with a thick quilt, a lamp that glowed more than it shone, a small bookshelf where someone had lined up paperbacks by height because neatness felt like hope. On the pillow sat a stuffed dog with one ear floppy, the sort of detail that said someone had thought about hands like Emily's before hers arrived. Nora didn't narrate the space like a salesperson. She only turned the lamp a bit lower. We keep a nightlight if you want it, she said. Bathroom's right there. I'll be in the kitchen if you need water. Emily stood in the middle of the room, the paper bag rustling softly as her arms loosened. She set it on the dresser with ceremony and took the notebooks out one at a time, stacking them like bricks. The colored pencils she didn't open. Not yet. She ran one finger over the stuffed dog's ear, not ready to claim it but unable to ignore it. Alexander stayed at the doorway, the same respectful distance as in the clinic. He didn't step over the threshold. Some rooms, especially the ones that begin again, belong first to the person who will sleep there. You'll be okay? He asked, not as a demand but as permission to answer no. Emily nodded, then surprised herself. She stepped forward and hugged him, a quick, fierce circle of arms around his waist. It was the kind of hug that said thank you and please don't disappear and I don't know how to do this but I'm trying, all at once. He placed his hand lightly between her shoulders, returning the embrace with the restraint of a man who understood that intensity could be another kind of taking. I'll be in the kitchen with Tessa for a few minutes, he said when she let go. If you need anything before sleep, tap the wall. It's a thin wall, the kind that carries good sounds. She smiled at that, good sounds. Okay. In the kitchen, steam curled from 2 mugs Nora had set out without asking for preferences. Tessa was already drafting the overnight case note on her tablet, her stylus moving like a violin bow. Protective order will be ready at 8, she said. Home visit scheduled for 9. School contact afternoon. Pediatric follow-up tomorrow at 10. Thank you, Alexander said, meaning not just for the list. He realized he was tired in a way different from work, the fatigue that comes from holding a fragile thing and refusing to look away. Nora leaned against the counter. She asked if rain smells new to anyone else, Nora said. I told her once, when I was little, my grandmother would put orange peels on the radiator and the whole house would smell like a sun that remembered us. Alexander exhaled, the sound almost a laugh. She'll like that. He turned his mug in his hands. I heard a sentence tonight, he said softly, mostly to himself. I can't take it anymore. I keep thinking, children learn those words from someone. Or from silence. Silence teaches fast, Nora said. But it forgets slow. Tessa's tablet chimed, the case note saved, the network of care catching thread. She glanced toward the hall. She's still awake, she said, hearing the not-quite hush that meant a child pacing thoughts into a new room. Do you want to say goodnight? Alexander hesitated. He promised not to claim any ground that wasn't his. But goodnight wasn't ownership, it was witness. He nodded and walked back down the short hall, stopping again at the doorway. Emily had climbed into bed but stayed sitting, knees up under the quilt. The stuffed dog now lay on its back beside her like a conspirator. She looked over and lifted a hand, the small wave of someone who didn't have language for thank you for finding me. He matched her wave with one of his own, small for a man his size. We'll be here in the morning, he said. There will be pancakes. That's the rumor. Her mouth tilted. With apples? With apples. He turned the lamp a notch lower, and the room softened like a photograph finding its focus. The rain on the window found its rhythm, a quiet metronome training the night to be kind. He stepped back, let the jam hide him, and felt for the first time that day the shape of something like relief. Not certainty, he knew better than to trust clean arcs in a world this complicated, but relief, the kind that slips in when the first domino of rescue falls the right way. In the kitchen, Tessa capped her pen. Nora rinsed 2 plates from some other night. The house, designed to be ordinary, held the extraordinary weight of a child breathing easier. Outside, the rain stitched the block together with silver thread. And somewhere across town, in a kitchen with a table that had learned to bruise, a teenage girl named Kayla sat on a stair and listened to the quiet her own words had helped make possible. Morning stretched pale over the safe house, thin light spilling through curtains that smelled faintly of detergent and lavender. Emily had fallen asleep at last, curled around the stuffed dog like a child finally given permission to be small. Her breathing was steady, her dreams undisclosed but no longer fractured by the echoes of slammed doors. Alexander hadn't slept. He sat in the common room with a file folder open on the table. Tessa had left it there after her late-night calls. Inside were intake forms, preliminary notes, the protective order drafted for a judge's signature. He read each line slowly, absorbing not just the facts but the shape of a life that had been left unattended too long. Tessa arrived just before dawn, carrying coffee in a paper cup and the weariness of someone who had watched this cycle repeat more times than she could count. She set the cup in front of him without asking and sat across the table. Protective order should be signed by 8, she said. A social worker will meet us here. Then we'll have to go back to the house, document conditions, interview the guardians, remove Kayla if needed. Alexander rubbed his temples. They'll fight. Most do, Tessa said. But truth doesn't care about volume. By the time Emily awoke, the house smelled of pancakes, just as promised. Nora placed a plate in front of her with slices of apple fanned out like a sunrise. Emily's eyes widened. She looked at Alexander as though testing whether promises held weight in this new place. He smiled softly. Told you. She ate slowly, savoring each bite as if memorizing not just the taste but the feeling of being allowed to choose. At 9, the knock came. A woman with a leather satchel introduced herself as Ms. Alvarez, a caseworker with years in her voice. She listened to Nora's overnight notes, reviewed Dr. Vale's report, and then crouched to meet Emily's eyes. You're very brave, she said. Today we'll visit your house together, but this time you won't be alone. Emily stiffened. Back there? Just for a short while, Ms. Alvarez said gently. We need to see it with our own eyes. Then we'll make decisions. But you'll stay safe. You'll stay with us. Emily's hand found Alexander's wrist, her fingers clinging with the urgency of someone terrified that safety might vanish if she blinked. He covered her hand with his. I'll be there, he said. Every minute. The ride back to the neighborhood felt heavier than the night before. Streets looked different in daylight. What last night had been shadows now revealed peeling paint, sagging porches, a mailbox bent at the hinge. When they reached the house, Kayla stood on the porch, hoodie zipped to her chin. She saw the group step out of the car and exhaled, as though she'd been holding her breath for hours. Inside, the air smelled of last night's arguments, stale and bitter. The man barked from the kitchen, "What is this, some kind of raid?" The woman leaned against the counter, arms crossed, her face arranged into practiced indifference. Ms. Alvarez's tone was steady. We're here under a protective order. We need to assess living conditions and ensure the children's well-being. You can't just take them, the man snapped. His eyes darted to Alexander. This is your doing, isn't it? Rich man thinks he can walk into anyone's home and decide what's right? Alexander's gaze didn't waver. I didn't decide. Emily did, when she said she couldn't take it anymore. I just listened. Kayla stepped forward then, her voice shaking but clear. They don't listen. They don't stop. It's always yelling, always blaming. Emily doesn't sleep. I try to cover her ears but it doesn't work. Her confession dropped like stones into the room, undeniable, heavy. Ms. Alvarez nodded. Thank you, Kayla. That matters. She turned to the adults. We'll be placing both children in protective care immediately. You'll have an opportunity to respond in court. But for now, they leave with us. The woman's mask cracked, tears welled, though pride kept her from wiping them away. We're not bad people, she whispered. No, Alexander said quietly. But sometimes not being bad isn't the same as being good enough. Emily clutched the paper bag from last night, the notebooks, the pencils, the small artifacts of a future still uncertain. Kayla moved to her side, looping an arm protectively around her shoulders. For the first time, Emily leaned into it, trusting the contact. The caseworker led them out. The man shouted after them, threats mixed with denials, but his words bounced off the porch railing and died in the morning air. Emily didn't turn back. At the curb, she paused, staring at the rain puddles still shining from the night before. It smells new, she murmured, almost to herself. Alexander heard and felt something shift, the fragile line between despair and possibility. They drove away, leaving behind walls that had shouted too long. The safe house awaited, but more than that, a path forward, hearings, evaluations, maybe foster placement, maybe reunification under strict watch. The process would be messy, filled with forms and hearings and fragile hopes. But for the first time, it was a process moving toward light. That night, when Emily lay in her new bed again, she opened one of the notebooks. The first page filled with raindrops sketched in careful strokes, a girl standing under them, face lifted, eyes open. In the corner, she drew a door, not closed, not locked, but wide open. Alexander saw the drawing the next morning and felt the weight of it. For a child who had once whispered "I can't take it anymore," the picture wasn't just art. It was testimony, proof that silence had finally been broken. And yet, he knew this was not the end. The battle was only beginning, against bureaucracy, against cycles that stretched across generations, against the belief that suffering in silence was the only option. But Emily had spoken. Kayla had spoken. And he had answered. The story of neglect was being rewritten, one line at a time. The hearing room was smaller than Emily imagined, more like a classroom that forgot to hang its drawings. There were chairs that squeaked when grown-ups shifted their weight, a flag near the window that barely moved, and a clock whose hands ticked with the patience of trees. Ms. Alvarez sat beside Emily, Kayla on the other side held her fingers, pretending not to. Alexander took the back row, a deliberate step behind them, as if to say "I'm here, but this story belongs to you." The judge didn't thunder. She spoke softly, read reports slowly, asked questions that knew where to land. Dr. Vale's assessment, Tessa's case notes, Nora's overnight observations, photos of the kitchen and the broken vent, attendance records from school, days missed when mornings were too loud to put on shoes. The adults from the house took turns with their truths, sharp-edged and round-edged and sometimes both. We tried. We're tired. We didn't know. The judge listened to every syllable, then breathed as if a great stone had been set on the table for all to see. Here's what we'll do, she said at last. Protective placement continues. Visitation, supervised. Mandatory counseling for the guardians. Nutritional support for the children. The house must be repaired before any return. This is not a punishment. It's a path. A path. The word found a place inside Emily as quiet as it was brave. Outside the courthouse, daylight had the clean brightness that follows rain. Tessa crouched to catch Emily's eyes. We go slow, okay? Slow is how sturdy is built. Emily nodded, and Kayla nodded, and for the first time both nods felt like 2 feet on the same rung of a ladder. The days that followed didn't turn into a montage. They were work. Paperwork with signatures that learned their own names. Mornings that started with oatmeal she chose and ended with pages colored into rain. Afternoons with Nora teaching pancake batter to listen to apples, evenings with Tessa helping Kayla learn to unbraid worry into sentences. Therapy, not an ocean, not a lighthouse, but a steady hand on a small boat that had learned too well how to row itself alone. At school, Emily met Mr. Patel, who ran art club with sleeves rolled and patience rolled farther. He gave her thick paper and said, "Tell me what color the word new is." She thought. "The color of a window right after someone opens it," she said. He didn't laugh, he set a box of pastels between them like a map. She drew a door that was wide open and a sky that held itself like it had something kind to say. Kayla, too, began to find rooms that didn't shout. A counselor who knew how to translate silence. A reading group where her voice found its level. She visited Emily's new classroom one afternoon with a plastic bag of gummy bears and, in a whisper that carried the whole length of the hallway, said, "We're okay," and for once it was not a prediction or a wish but a small, present tense. Alexander visited lightly, never with cameras, never with headlines, always with time. He set up a scholarship that didn't have Emily's name on it outside official papers. He believed in help that didn't make a child famous for needing. He funded the heater repair on a dozen houses up and down the block without a ribbon to cut. He stopped in on art club with a tray of paper because Mr. Patel had mentioned they ran out too quickly, and when Emily looked up, he lifted a hand as if he were greeting the rain. There were supervised visits with the guardians. A room designed to be neutral, no pictures to weaponize, no corners to hide in. The woman who had once kept her hands busy wiping already clean counters came with palms open and words that sounded like they'd been rehearsed carefully and then allowed to smudge. "I'm learning. I'm sorry. I was drowning and didn't know I could call for a raft." The man spoke less, but he spoke, and when he did the sentences landed without breaking the table. Boundaries were explained not as walls but as bridges that know exactly how much weight they can carry. "Do you think they'll change?" Emily asked Ms. Alvarez after one visit, the question like a paper boat she wasn't sure would float. "I think people can," Ms. Alvarez said. "And I think your safety isn't the prize for someone else's progress. It's the starting point for anything that comes next." On a Saturday that the sky spared for softness, Nora organized a small picnic in the pocket park near the safe house. Not a celebration, celebrations demand endings, but a pause. Children from 3 other placements came, a shaggy dog borrowed from a neighbor practiced looking like he could tell a joke. Mr. Patel arrived with sidewalk chalk and drew a giant rectangle labeled window on the pavement. "For anyone who needs to breathe," he said. Emily sketched a river of blue chalk flowing out of the window and down the sidewalk towards a storm drain. "To the ocean," she whispered to Kayla. "To the biggest ocean," Kayla said. "Where the rain goes to discover its brave." They ate sandwiches and cut fruit and laughed at the dog's stubborn insistence that frisbees are merely flat moons. Alexander sat beneath a maple that shook its leaves like a slow applause. He watched Emily run, not fast, not like children who are trying to outrun something, but with the exact speed of a child who trusts the ground. Later, beneath a shade where sunlight folded itself into small surprises, Emily sat on the grass and drew. She drew a table, the old one, but this time there were hands around it that knew the difference between feeding and forcing, between asking and ordering. She drew a bench on a porch where a man had once asked what she liked. She drew the stuffed dog with one floppy ear standing guard. She drew a door open and a window cut from chalk into sky. "Can I give this to you?" she asked Alexander, not shy, just certain. The page showed raindrops that were gently wrong on purpose, each one a different size as if rain knew how to be a crowd. He took the drawing as if it were the first piece of art the world had ever made. "I'll keep it where decisions are made," he said. "So the room remembers who it's for." There were setbacks. Nights when sleep remembered old habits and knocked on the window with cold fingers. A morning when a mail envelope stamped with a court date made Emily's stomach twist into a small, hard knot. A Tuesday when Kayla's old house crept into her new day through a smell from a cafeteria pan. But each time, hands were there that knew the map, Nora's tea, Tessa's voice that could widen a corridor, Dr. Vale's steady questions that put lights along a hallway, Ms. Alvarez's binder that carried 1,000 little ways to reach morning. One evening, weeks after the hearing, thunder gathered like drums that had finally decided to practice together. Emily stood at the safe house window and watched the sky stitch itself, seam after bright seam. She held the card Alexander had left on the table that first night, now soft at the edges. She didn't need to call. The number had done its work simply by existing, a promise that reaching was allowed. "You smell it?" Kayla asked, coming up behind her. Emily inhaled. There it was, the clean, green scent that made the world lean forward. "It smells like new," she said. "Like new we picked," Kayla answered. Downstairs, Nora called them to the table. Bowls of warm soup, slices of bread that had learned how to be kind, apples cut in thin moons. Emily slid into her chair and looked around, at Kayla's shoulders finally settling, at Nora's hands, the kind that made quilts and questions both, at the small vase of marigolds that insisted color could be louder than fear. She lifted her spoon. She tasted. She chose again. After dinner, she opened her notebook. On the first page, the raindrops she had drawn the day after the first hearing looked smaller now, as if time had watered them. On a new page she drew 3 words, careful and round. Not "I can't take it anymore." Not the sentence that had once felt like a house. She wrote, "I'm not alone." And the room agreed. If you felt Emily's journey in your chest, if you believe no child should whisper "I can't take it anymore" at the dinner table, help us keep telling stories that bring light where the night learned to shout. Like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to Cryspire. Your single click is a small hand on someone else's shoulder. Together, we can make It Smells Like New a real moment in more homes than we will ever see.